In our previous lectures, we've looked at government-private enterprise relationships. We will now turn our attention to another sector in which government engages with, notably the NGO sector. In this lecture and in the next lecture, we will be looking at government-NGO relationships. Non-governmental organizations are self-society actors who act as a third sector between the public and private sector. They are basically an independent sector from the state. But this does not mean there cannot be other types of NGOs who are part of a corporate state environment, such as the Chinese case, which we will look at later in our lecture. In this situation, the state is intimately linked with NGOs to the extent that there are government-organized non-governmental organizations, or GONGOs for short. NGOs in general can intervene at the international level in areas where governments cannot. For example, they can reach disadvantaged sectors or monitor and enforce agreements where states do not have the resources to do so. NGOs form a large part of the global civil society, that is, a thick social space of civil interaction. They are networks of organizations and citizens who come together to effect normative change, and perhaps over time they can cause structural change. NGOs can be seen as epistemic communities, a network of professionals with recognized expertise and competence in a particular domain and an authoritative claim to policy-relevant knowledge within that domain or issue area. NGOs can be seen as an epistemic communities insofar that there's a shared set of normative and principle beliefs, there's a notion of validity, and a common policy enterprise. When we try to disaggregate the NGO, we generally look at their sources of power, main functions, and dilemmas. First, the sources of power. In general, all NGOs have material power, symbolic power, interpretive power, geographical power, and a political standpoint. What we mean by material power is that NGOs have a size and a budget. They have an ability to acquire more resources. NGOs have a symbolic power, an ability to have legitimacy in their statements. Now, this may depend on material power. NGOs have an interpretive power, an ability to bring expertise to the forum and interpret social facts and experiences for a larger audience. Interpretive communities are the location where meaning is created and asserted in relation to a set of facts. In fact, NGOs have symbolic capital amongst publics having their ideas acknowledged. NGOs have a geographical power. It can be local, national, or international. Finally, NGOs have a political standpoint, a particular values, a particular belief structure, which gives them power. We can also suggest that NGOs have four main functions. First is to set the agenda, putting issues on the table. This may involve applying pressure to political leadership or lobbying, using the press to raise awareness, or to mobilize public opinion. Another function that NGOs have is to effect negotiations, to assist in the creation of agreements. By using their epistemic understanding, it allows NGOs to provide specialized information. A third function that NGOs have is to confer legitimacy. It's to take opinions of the public and thus add legitimacy in their stance. Finally, NGOs make solutions and agreements work. They implement decisions and can act as a monitoring agency. As we delve deeply into the government-NGO relationship, the People's Republic of China is a apt case to understand how this relationship operationalizes itself. The Chinese state has gradually withdrawn from a burgeoning sort of market economy, creating space for a numerical growth of non-governmental organizations. The increase of NGOs has to a great extent mirrored the rising social challenges in the nation as a result of economic liberalization. The NGO sector is currently heavily regulated by the central state. And in fact, we can articulate there's a corporatist sort of environment in the Chinese context. The corporatist framework does not define any political system per se, but rather they are institutional mechanisms in service of government. In fact, we can argue that the Chinese state has shifted from tools of coercion to manage society, what we could call overt sanctioning, to developing strong ties with social organizations through a tacit sanctioning process. Local states are the intermediaries between the central state and the local population. In the case of NGOs, by privileging the local state, we can discover different factors that shape the development of NGOs. This is not to say that the relationship between NGOs and the central state is not important. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The relationship between the central state and NGOs is still important, since it is currently the level where regulatory frameworks are centered. However, it's at the municipal level where you find that it rewards NGOs for their work. There's an inclusion of any potentially threatening elements into the fold of the government at the municipal level. Namely, local state actors may seek to engage with NGOs under the guise that they can assist the state's efforts in promoting harmonious development amongst its constituents. In the future, however, there will be a large number of government stakeholders involved in the resolution of social issues. This gives NGOs the potential to increase opportunities to collaborate and cooperate with government agencies at all levels. This concludes the first half of our lecture looking at government-NGO relationships. In the second half, we will continue our conversation on China and notably examine the institutional environment there and how do NGOs develop and mature in an institutional environment that's authoritarian in nature. If you're interested in the NGO literature and NGOs in general, please have a look at our lecture series on NGO governance and management.